thunder and lightning came crashing across the ocean here towards the coast of Carrick. And him and his crew imagined that they saw a chariot of fire ridden by a great... Good afternoon YouTube, welcome back to the channel. It's raining rather steadily in Scotland today. Every time I dry the camera it just gets wet again, so I'm just going to try and roll with it. Hopefully it'll go off. The sun's threatening to come out. Now today I'm headed over to an old abbey called Crossraguel. But before I get there I want to head up a hill that's quite close to here. It gives a kind of panoramic view of all the sort of things I'm going to be talking about. And also at the top of that hill used to be a fortress, an old prehistoric fort, so again it's quite interesting to look at. But today's story is all about family feuds that almost led to war, an abbot being roasted over a fire, all good stuff. Medieval Scotland. Stay tuned. You see this hill in front of us here guys, that's called Kildune. That's a prehistoric fortress up there. You can see there's a monument on top. Now I want to see if I can try and get up there. I don't know if I can get up on the bike, but I'll try and get as close as I can. And that's because it gives me a sort of panoramic view of all the areas I want to travel to today. And it'll help to give some perspective in what I'm talking about when I mention these different places. You see what, if there's less rain you're able to ride through there, but they've obviously put this little bridge here now. These things are absolutely everywhere. It's quite incredible. Look, I'm getting quite close from here actually. That's a different road up there. That's very slimy today. Exceptionally slimy on this little track. I've never been up this hill before. Again, that's not unusual. I try to go places that I've never been as well. You know, it makes it more interesting for me if I can learn the story as well as you guys. Right then. From the top of the hill here where the monument is, if you look south you're looking towards Girvan and Daly down the Ayrshire coast. Now I did a video last week about abandoned castles, and that's where I went to Dilwarren. If you look north from there you're looking towards the village of Maybole. You might just see it through the mist and no more here. It's a very old village. They get some very old churches, you know, dating away back to the 1200s, 1300s. There's an old castle there as well. Now, if you swing left of Maybole, you're looking towards Balterrasan Castle and Crossraguel Abbey. Now that's where I'm headed to next. Further over from there though, towards the coast, you're looking towards Culzean Castle and you're looking towards Dunure. Now the reason I'm talking about all these places is because they're so closely linked historically. That's another 5 minutes of my life gone. See the amount of time I spend trying to get GoPros to work, you wouldn't believe. They're so unbelievably glitchy. I'm forever taking batteries out, putting them back in, taking SIM cards out, putting them back in. So if cameras just freeze on you, and if it's not that then it's sound. You get sound problems with them. Maybe it's my fault, but it's difficult to get them to work, you know, for any length of time at all. They're not good. Balterrasan Castle. Now believe it or not, this place is actually for sale. You can buy that bad boy. I'm going to pull in here hopefully. As you can see, it needs a bit of restoration work. So this is Crossraguel Abbey. We're not allowed to go in, but we can get the drone over. That won't be a problem. It's been quite an impressive building back in its day. Now this is not a castle, it's an abbey. So monks would have lived here. Don't know if the GoPro pick it up, but you can actually see Culzean here. And then right on the headland there you've got the lighthouse at Turnberry Turnberry Golf Course. Now owned by Donald Trump. But folks, I can't get into Crossraguel Abbey, it's all locked off, but I've got some drone footage of that now. And what I've decided to do is I'm going to go over to Dunure, because there's a story I want to tell that links Crossraguel and Dunure together. So it might actually make it a little bit more interesting in the end. But look at this coastline. Got the Isle of Arran here. Down to the left is Culzean, and that big old rock there is the Ailsa of Craig. We'll be at Dunure in a couple of minutes. You see, I've got a motorbike, so you can lock the gates if you like. So like most of the castles in this area, this one belonged to the Kennedy family. Now it's been said that they actually took this castle by siege from Norwegian Vikings who were trying to escape from the Battle of Largs. This wasn't the most prominent castle in this region, and it wasn't the most important one either. But between the 13th and the 16th century, the Kennedys really developed this into a really formidable fortress. The most notorious of the Kennedys was Gilbert Kennedy. He was the 4th Earl of Cassilis, and that's because in 1570 he kidnapped someone very important, and he brought them here to this castle as his prisoner, or initially as his guest. At this period in history, the abbot at Crossraguel was Gilbert Kennedy's uncle. Yeah, but he died in 1564. It shouldn't really matter who controls or who is the abbot of the local church, or certainly the most powerful church in the local area. But sometimes the prophets are more about the prophets than they are about saving people's souls. Now, the person on the throne at that point was Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, it's been said that she had nothing to do with this particular incident, but however it panned out, Crossraguel Abbey was not retained by the Kennedy family. In other words, there wasn't a new Kennedy who became the abbot of Crossraguel. The abbey was passed over to a man called Alan Stewart. So Gilbert Kennedy then starts to have the new abbot followed. And one day, whilst he's outside Crossraguel Abbey in the woods, he's actually kidnapped by the Earl himself and 16 other men. Now, his account says that he was initially cajoled and invited here to Dunure, but he was under no illusion that he was not allowed to say no. You see, the thing is, Gilbert didn't want the abbot dead. What he wanted was Crossraguel, and the only way he could do that was to get the abbot to sign it over to him. But the abbot was a stubborn man. No number of threats or cajoling or promises could get him to sign over Crossraguel Abbey. So finally, in frustration, Gilbert had his cook, his pantry man and his baker drag him down into the cookhouse. They had him strung up on one of the great fireplaces, and then they slowly started to roast him over the fire. And instead of immediately signing over Crossraguel Abbey like any sensible person would do, he pleaded and begged with them to take his own life rather than take God's house. Eventually the abbot caved in, and he signed that piece of paper meaning that Gilbert Kennedy would take possession of Crossraguel Abbey again. But Kennedy now had a problem. What's he going to do with this half-roasted abbot that he's got in his dungeon here? Luckily for the monk, the abbot, Alan Stewart, he had a friend and another Kennedy in this area, Kennedy of Bargany, and he found out about that. So knowing the weakness at Dunure, Bargany sent men overnight to try and rescue the abbot. Even though this garrison were slowly roasting a monk over the fire, they were still deeply religious. So every morning they would open the castle gates in order to attend mass. But the chapel for Dunure Castle was outside the perimeter wall. So when they opened the gates in the morning, Bargany's men stormed in and took control of the castle. In a fit of rage, Gilbert Kennedy comes here with some of the other great lords and barons in this area. Other Kennedys from Maybole Castle and over from Culzean. So now we're in a situation where one of the most powerful families in Scotland are essentially at civil war with each other. It's a classic story of good versus evil. Now it's easy to imagine that Bargany was the good guy and that Gilbert Kennedy was the bad guy. It's not quite as straightforward as that, because prior to this both Bargany and Gilbert Kennedy had worked together to procure another abbey at Glenluce. But what happened in those particular circumstances was that when the abbot of Glenluce died, they bribed a senior monk to forge his signature, showing that the abbey at Glenluce had actually been signed over to the Kennedys. Now, in a fit of paranoia and not wanting the story to get out, they then bribed a peasant to stick him. In other words, they had the monk killed. And then Bargany, the man who was now rescuing this monk, he had that peasant hanged on a trumped-up charge of theft. So he wasn't involved in this, and there wasn't a family feud through some sort of moral high ground or any kind of religious reasoning. Through some sort of strange twist of fate, it turns out that Alan Stewart, the abbot at Crossraguel, was actually the brother-in-law of Bargany. Yeah, so there's absolutely no doubt that when word of this got back to him, he knew that his wife was going to be extremely upset about the fact that her brother was being roasted here at Dunure. Kennedy realises that the game is up. Yeah, so he abandons his siege here of Dunure, and he leaves them to do what they will with the monk. He was able to live to a ripe old age. And it's no real surprise that he was never able to walk again on account of the fact that his legs and his feet had been basted over a fire for several days by a cook, a baker and a pantryman. You might be asking, what was the punishment for Gilbert Kennedy? Well, the Privy Council ordered him to pay a fine of £2,000. Now in 1570 that's the equivalent of millions in today's money. And he handed that over without batting an eyelid. So not only did the abbot live to a ripe old age, he was actually now a wealthy man. In fact, over and above this £2,000, Kennedy agreed to give him a sum of money which would allow him to live comfortably for the rest of his life. And then the following year, Gilbert Kennedy decided just to buy Crossraguel Abbey anyway. That's almost the odd thing about this entire situation. This was just a case of sheer greed. It's not as if the Kennedys couldn't afford to buy this land, or this little abbey at Crossraguel, or the abbey at Glenluce, or any other abbey for that matter. It's just because they didn't want to. Now there's a couple of interesting little legends that sort of top this story off, and they're easy to imagine here as we stand on this parapet, looking out at sea towards the Ailsa of Craig. Now on the 14th of December 1576, a huge storm came rolling in as the master of an Irish cutter and his crew went past the Ailsa of Craig here. It was like the gates of hell opening up, and thunder and lightning came crashing across the ocean here towards the coast of Carrick. And him and his crew imagined that they saw a chariot of fire ridden by a great demon. Now needless to say, the master and his crew were terrified. And a few minutes later, that thunder and lightning came screaming past their ship again, out towards the horizon past the Ailsa of Craig. And they imagined that they could hear the demonic screams of a man in great pain. Of course, the master of that ship and his crew were not to know at that time that the great Earl Kennedy, Gilbert, had just been crushed by his horse. The superstitious ruminations of the local peasantry here. A tale that's been passed down through the ages that tells of the great Earl who roasted the abbot over his fire, only to be dragged to the great fire himself 5 years later. And there's another interesting little part to this tale, which is perhaps a little bit more credible because it was witnessed by some of the great and good in Scottish society. Kennedy's funeral procession went past Crossraguel Abbey towards his final resting place in Maybold. A great black crow came down and landed on top of his coffin. Now at that time, the black crow or the raven was regarded as a symbol of great evil in Scotland. In fact, people often referred to it as the bird of Satan. And the entire funeral procession, including all the great lords and ladies of Scotland, were frozen in terror. So much so that even the horses refused to move. And eventually,